Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of The Good Shepherd. In tonight's edition, we're going to be talking about how to choose your spouse. That's for all the young people still trying and planning to get married now. What are the ways and the process of actually choosing your own spouse? And joining us here in the studio to shed more light on this issue is Father Peter Farrington from the British Orthodox Church. Father Peter, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Father Peter, is there some sort of a criteria, at least some sort of a superficial criteria that someone should have at the back of their minds when choosing their partner in life, their spouse?
Let me say first of all that I'm not an expert on Egyptian culture in this aspect, but I think that many of the things that we'll be discussing are of value for all Christians, and that all Christians should take great care in the person they choose for a spouse. So I think these are universal questions, not ones that apply only to people of an Egyptian cultural background. I think that first of all, if we are committed Orthodox Christians, then we must look for a partner who comes from within our own church communities. Not because those people are the best or the holiest or anything like that, but because we have to enter into a union with this person. And that means that we have to share a spiritual life with them. Otherwise, the foundations of our marriage will be shaky. So I would say that, first of all, if we are coming to an age where we have some sense within us that we need to find a partner for our life, we should be looking within our own communities.
Well, what about the Egyptians, for instance, who live abroad, live in different countries, who are maybe unsuccessful or unlucky in finding Egyptians living in the countries they're actually living in, and at the same time they don't really have the luxury of going back and forth to Egypt to try and find a spouse. How would they solve their issue?
Let me say first of all that as the Orthodox churches move into the West and into countries where Orthodoxy has not been established before, if the churches are involved in missionary work in those places, then we will see more and more of people from those cultures and those societies naturally becoming Orthodox. We should not be looking to find a partner back in a different culture, especially if we are second or third generation. We should be looking to find good Orthodox spiritual partners from the place where we find ourselves. Of course, that doesn't solve the problem for any particular person, and I do have many people emailing me asking me to provide a wife for them, usually a wife. But if our church was setting itself to evangelize and bring people from the Western countries into the church and into Orthodoxy, then we would find local people, men and women, who were suitable partners for people who had emigrated from Egypt. While we remain communities looking in on ourselves, then the number of possible partners will be very limited. I know some countries where there are only one or two Coptic Orthodox communities, and so that almost becomes an impossibly small group of people to find a life partner among. But if we are busy seeking to share our faith, and we are seeing young men and women from European countries, America and Australia, entering into the life of our church, then quite naturally the number of possible partners will grow. And the advantage will be that not only will these be devout, godly, serious Orthodox people, but they already belong to the culture in which we're looking to establish a household and a family. And that will be a very great advantage, because we will not constantly be working out how do we bring Egyptian cultures and traditions into the West. We already have a partnership that unites these two cultures. So I would say that first of all, if our church wants to care for those of its people living in the West, we must look to be a missionary people. Otherwise, we are an inward-looking one, and marriage will be very difficult. We must also consider the fact that there is only one Orthodox Church. There is only one Church of Christ, and we are a part of it in the Coptic Orthodox Patriarchate. But all of the other canonical Orthodox churches are equally part of the same Church of Christ. Again, if our churches in the lands of the West are only looking in on themselves and not attending any services or having anything to do with other Orthodox Christians, we cannot be surprised that the number of possible life partners is very much reduced. One of the people in my own British Orthodox church, a deacon, has recently married an Indian Orthodox lady. She is a devout woman who is entirely Orthodox, and in their marriage they unite two different cultures. And it seems to me that this is a healthy thing. So I would encourage also that our young people living in the lands of the West make a point of trying to visit other churches, not with the intent of finding someone they find attractive, but because they want to share the Orthodox life with other people who are Orthodox in the towns and cities where they live. That then means that there are 4 or 5 or 6 churches, all with their own young people, all struggling with the same problem of finding life partners. But it means the number of possible communities and households that can be established is increased.
Yes.
I think part of the problem then is that we are still small groups looking in on ourselves.
Well, Father, also it seems, well, this doesn't sound like a problem to a lot of young people, but the problem also lies with the parents, where they don't actually allow, or they don't, they definitely, they're not in favor of marrying from a different nationality or a different culture, even if they are Orthodox, let alone if they are Catholics or whatever. So, do you feel that this could be a wise decision by the families, knowing that different cultures and different traditions might not be a problem the first couple of years, but down the line it would be a major problem? Because most people are not saints, we're not saints, and we all have our flaws and weaknesses, so it is a problem that is, or an accident waiting to happen. Do you feel that this is a right this is a right attitude and a frame of mind to actually guide your children into marriage?
I think that in particular circumstances that might be a very wise thing, but not universally. I feel that universally, if our churches were engaged in reaching out to the people in the cultures where we now find ourselves, that would be an advantage for us. I think if our churches were seeking to share in worship and witness with other Orthodox Christians, that would be an advantage to us. It is not very wise or helpful to always have in mind, I am looking for a life partner. That can become an obsession that makes you become a rather odd person to be around. But if from the beginning we are thinking, how can I share my faith with people who live here in the West? And if from the beginning our churches are thinking, how can we share the Orthodox life with people of other Orthodox churches, then I think that we are working out some of these cultural issues outside of marriage. We're working them out in the life of the church in a much safer condition. We understand what some of the problems are. Because we know many people from the Armenian church or the Indian church, we already know what are the different cultural aspects we need to be aware of. But we also come then to understand that perhaps they have the same view on marriage that we do. Actually, we have many things in common. So I think that if we were already trying to establish wider community connections, these would sort out some of those problems. If 2 random people from different cultures who are both Orthodox get together and marry, perhaps against their parents' wishes and so with family problems as well, then that certainly can cause problems further down the line. But if church youth groups are meeting together for many years as a natural and ordinary event each month or each week, then already people from different cultures, and don't forget people who are living in the West also have to become westernized in some way, these cultural issues become understood, I think. So we need to be thinking, apart from the person who is emailing me today, perhaps saying, can you find me a bride? What should we be doing over the next 5 and 10 and 20 years? How should we be widening the Orthodox community in which our young people can find partners? And how should we be investigating already as priests and bishops the tensions, and parents even, the tensions that might exist? I think that parents are wise to be cautious for their children, but when I see an absolute resistance to allow a child to marry someone from outside of a community, I'm not sure that that expresses a sense of being one in Christ, which should also be there.
Yes. Well, Father Peter, you brought up a point which is how the families are dealing with each other, and a lot of people are highlighting the importance of actually having some sort of harmony and agreement between both sets of families. Now, there are two different cases, two different scenarios. Sometimes both families are totally on the same page, on quite harmonious, just for the sake of actually having their kids just get married and get out of the house. That's one thing. The other scenario is that families might not be on the same wavelength with each other until the kids get married, and then it takes them quite some time. But then when they do get on the same page and get on the same wavelength as each other, it's quite harmonious and quite healthy for the marriage. So is there one basic rule for how families should deal with each other or accept each other, or should maybe compromise for the desires of their kids, or should families be quite strict regarding who they think their son or their daughter should marry?
Yes. Well, I think that if we are imagining families growing up in the West, it will become impossible over the generations for such a hard view to be taken. Parents of all kinds, parents in Britain for thousands of years, I'm sure, even back into the ancient times, and the Romans, always worried about who their children were marrying. That is entirely normal. But as people are growing up as British people from an Egyptian ethnic and cultural background, I think that they will not submit to such absolute judgments. And so it must always increasingly be a matter of how do families get on together. And there was one other case that you didn't mention where families don't ever really get on the same wavelength, you know. But it is entirely possible for families to respect each other, even when they are completely different in outlook and attitudes. I think what is necessary is for families and parents to have in mind the well-being of their children. And our children's choices are not always our own. And when we are looking for a partner for our child, increasingly in the West, that's not something that our children will allow us to do. They don't want us to be looking for a partner for them. They will find one on their own. What they want us to do is to be supportive of them. I think there are times when you say to your child early on in a relationship, because we are talking about the West and how the West does things, you say, I really don't think this person is suitable, you know? And you carefully point out some of the character flaws, perhaps. But you have to be careful as a parent that you are not projecting onto this relationship your own fears and your own feelings. It may be that you have a daughter who wants to marry someone and they like football and you like rugby. That isn't a reason for you to stand in the way of such a relationship. It may be that the person doesn't have the job that you would want your daughter to marry into. But I don't believe you have the right or responsibility to prevent a marriage on that basis, not in the West, because that's not part of our culture. I think that if, as Christians, we respect all men and women who work honestly and earnestly, then whatever the job a person has is honourable if they work hard. So I think the parents themselves, they will have a care for their children, but they must be very careful they are not projecting other attitudes from within themselves onto this couple that is trying to form. In the end, we wish to protect our children, and it is necessary and right that we should warn them of various consequences of marrying particular people. You know, there is a great educational difference, we might say, you know, and you might find that a real problem. His friends are all from the university, your friends are all from the place where you work. That might be a problem. We can suggest these things. But in the end, we have to be supportive of our children, because as they become Europeans, as they become Americans and Australians, I do not believe that they will listen to absolute instructions from their parents. So we have to work out, as Christians who have a care for them, how do we support them and encourage them to do that which seems best, while also giving them some space to make mistakes in their lives.
Yes. Father, what about people who are trying to get married for the sake of a citizenship or any sort of interest and purpose behind such a marriage? And I'm not talking about that it's it's just for the passport or the
Yes.
citizenship? What if there's a lot at stake?
Yes.
What if there's a job? What if there's a future? What if there's a huge income that is being transferred
Yes.
to their homeland? And it really depends on having this citizenship.
Yes.
What's your view regarding that?
My own personal view as a British person seeing people wanting to come to Britain, and my own view as a priest who sometimes has people approach me, and it's clear from corresponding with them they are just looking for a visa, is that this is criminal, you know, and nothing good can come of beginning something with a criminal intent. Even if it is to have some good end in view of gaining money, and I promise if I get the money, God, I will give some to charity. If it begins in something that is criminal and illegal, nothing good can ever come of it. More than that, it is almost a blasphemy against God. Because if it was merely a secular ceremony, we see many thousands of these happen in Britain. Someone from Nigeria will marry someone from Bulgaria they have never met in a pretend marriage to gain entry to the country. That is bad enough, it is criminal. But to go into a church and to ask the grace of God on something that is a sham is blasphemy and will cause great harm to those who are involved in it, especially to probably the innocent party, often a woman, who thinks she is entering a marriage but discovers it is a business contract. I am also a little concerned about those who are so desperate to get married. There comes a time in a person's life when they are aware that they need intimacy and companionship, and that is a good thing. And that is a sign of God that He is leading us. But to become so desperate is not a helpful or a good thing. It becomes a harmful obsession. The people that we engaged with, the women we meet, for instance, if you are a man, you begin to see them in the wrong way as someone who might become my wife and satisfy my need for companionship, instead of someone who is a sister in God, loved by God, and worthy of respect. So I also worry about that. In my own life, I married, I don't know how personal I'm allowed to be, I married when I was 26, and for many years I had felt that desire for companionship. But I think, as with all of the aspects of our life, we must trust God. Does God not know that we need a wife, you know? Does He not know that we need a job? Does He not know that we have so many needs? But He asks us to seek first the kingdom, and then all of these things, including a wife, will be given to us. I think that sometimes God withholds a partner from us because we are in the wrong place. We are so obsessed with the idea of satisfying our need for a companion, and loneliness is a terrible thing, that we are the wrong people to be married. We would hurt someone else if we married them. It is only in a sense when we are able to let go of our own needs and consider marriage as somewhere where we give to someone else that perhaps God is then ready to bring someone into our life. So sometimes more will happen in our life if we let go of that obsession than if we press on with it as hard as possible.
Well, if we talk to any priest or any spiritual person, they would always say that whatever you do, in the end, it's going to be God's will, and you should always ask for God's guidance. Now, how would you know what is God's will? Because you can meet someone and you can even get engaged in a church with a priest and everything, and maybe a week or two before getting married, you would break it off and call it off. How would you know that this is God's will and this is God's choice and guidance?
I would say that I've never been a great one in favour of the idea that God has one special person that He wants us to marry, and that it's the job of our life to find this one person by attending as many youth groups as possible until they become noticeable. I think that if, as we've spoken of in earlier episodes, the purpose of our life is to give and to give love, then there are many Christian women, if you are a man, that you can enter into a relationship of marriage with, where you are giving yourself to them and not seeking something from the other person all the time. I think that if we worried a little bit more about what sort of person we are, am I ready yet to be married? You know, this is why it's not good for young Orthodox people to rush into having dates and relationships when they are young teenagers or even older teenagers, they are not in a place where they're able to think of if they are prepared. They have so many emotions swimming through them that they are sure means they are in love with someone, but being in love with someone is not the same as loving someone. You can be in love with someone as an emotion, and it's a wonderful, exciting experience, but to love someone is when your partner is not very well and is being sick, you are willing to hold a bowl there and help them, you know. It is to take care of that person you have committed yourself to when, in the English marriage service from the Anglican Church, in sickness and in health, you know. I don't think that a young person who is immature in the faith is properly ready to think, will I love this person when they are not as beautiful as they are now? Will I love this person when they are ill and unable to take care of me? What if this person became paralyzed? Would I still submit myself to care for that person? So I think, in my experience, waiting a little later, seeking to be mature in the Christian faith, being under the guidance of our spiritual fathers, asking ourselves always and them, am I yet prepared to be married, is the best preparation to start looking for a partner. Feeling that we are lonely and we have a friend who is 19 and has got married, so we want to get married, isn't a good start.
Yes.
Because we must begin with ourselves. If I wanted to become a doctor, then even as a young person, I would have to think, I must do biology at school. I will have to do physics and chemistry. I may have to do a pre-med course. You know, there's a whole list of things I have to do to prepare myself even to become a medical student. And then I may have to work for 8 years without being a doctor, but with that in view, getting myself prepared to be a doctor. I think in the same way, when we are thinking of something as important as marriage, being prepared, being the right people, is what we should worry about most, and then God himself will bring the people to us that could be our life partners.
Father Peter, a lot of people, when they have a certain sort of criteria choosing their spouse, they always they look at some of the materialistic things, the background check, the degrees, the level of wealth, all of these things. And also there's another side, which is the spiritual level. Now, a lot of people would say, well, you need to marry someone who is close to God and strong spiritually. And that would be something great. But what if you fall in love or pursue someone who is not as spiritually strong in Christ as you would have hoped for? Is it okay to think that maybe we will grow together, maybe I will help him or help her in actually becoming stronger spiritually, getting them closer to God? Would you be delusional if you start thinking that way, or should you just stick to the level of spirituality that you know you're good with?
Well, if we take it out of the spiritual world for a minute and we look at physical characteristics, you know, if we were to marry someone and say, I love that, I think I can love that woman, and when I marry her, I will change her. I will give her some plastic surgery. She needs to lose a bit of weight. She talks in a common way. I'll need to teach her to speak differently. We are actually thinking of marrying someone completely different. And it is not fair of us to take one person as our life partner and then spend our time trying to make them someone else. If we are willing to marry someone who has a limited experience of God, then we should not complain that throughout our marriage they grow no further. We've already chosen them as someone who has a limited spiritual life. In fact, we have chosen them because we find them physically attractive, which it seems to me is partly an expression of lust. We may feel they come from a wealthy family, which is an expression of envy or jealousy or greed, you know. So if we are not looking for someone who has the qualities we want entirely, then we are deluding ourselves, because it is not fair to try and change them. It is much better, in my mind, again, if we have become that person who is ready for marriage in a serious Orthodox Christian manner, then the women who will seem most attractive to us will be those who do have this Spirit of God in them. And I believe that if I have spent a year preparing myself under my priest, he has told me you must learn to sacrifice yourself, so be humble. You must get rid of that pride you have, you know. You must start saving money so that you have some money behind you. If my priest has helped me to do all of this preparation, then I believe that having become a more spiritual person, God will send a spiritual woman to me to marry.
Yes.
If I am still only thinking this person is so beautiful, and we do not look at the beauty of the heart, then I believe I am still the wrong person. I know I keep saying this, but I think that if I as a man or a woman as a woman is not in the right place with God, then we will make wrong decisions.
Yes.
If we are in the right place, for instance, I have known priests, and they are to be priested for some important service, and within 1 week, the church has found a woman for them to marry, and they have married this person. And they have spent their whole life together in partnership, and they did not have some long love affair. The church has said, here is a sister that we suggest you marry so that you can become a priest. And they are able to live together and love each other because their hearts were in the right place. They were not filled with emotion about each other, but they gave themselves to each other willingly in Christ.
Yes.
And I think that that is really where we should look to be as Christians. Can I love this person? She is a dear person who loves God. She comes from a poorer background than my family, but I feel a connection with her, and I think we can be a family together, you know. I think that it is the spiritual things which are most important.
Yes, definitely. It is one of the most important decisions a man or a woman can make during their life, choosing a spouse. Obviously, it's not as spontaneous and not as easy or shouldn't be really taken lightly, because it is a future of two people, a future of actually a family, and something that should be planned in Christ. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of The Good Shepherd. But before we go, I'd like to thank Father Peter Farrington from the British Orthodox Church. Father Peter, always a pleasure having you with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for another episode and another topic of The Good Shepherd. I'm Hani Seif. Thank you for joining us.